Sell more weapons! Sell more weapons!
Unless you're living under a rock, you're probably aware of the fact that Israel is currently at war with Hamas. This latest upheaval started with the October 7th attacks, when Hamas killed around 1,200 people, mostly Israeli nationals, in a surprise assault. Hamas also took hundreds of hostages. These two were mostly Israeli nationals, but people from other countries, including the US, were captured as well. A lot of you have asked me to comment on this, and I probably will eventually, if I find something unique or interesting to say about it. This is the sort of thing that I will be much more willing to talk about in the future, once the dust settles and there's a lot more clarity. This is not a news of the day channel. I don't pretend to report stuff to my audience or release breaking news. And I'm not going to hop on a hot news story just for the sake of some clicks. Most of you who watch this channel probably can guess more or less where I stand on the issue anyways. Besides, by letting some time pass, I'm less likely to get details wrong, which is a hazard anytime, but particularly with the fog of war scenario. I've gotten things wrong before, and while I surely will again, I'd rather prevent suffering that embarrassment as much as possible. Not all content creators seem to share this concern, though. You may remember, just a few weeks ago, a significant portion of the internet was telling us that war with Iran was imminent. On Halloween, Jimmy Dore tweeted out, "Well, the military-industrial complex and Joe Biden's handlers are gonna get their war with Iran. Doesn't seem like there's a way to stop World War III now. They've wanted this for at least 20 years, but first they had to do Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, and Ukraine." This tweet was quote tweeting a post that has since been deleted. I have no idea why, but the account that originally tweeted it is still active. It's actually a feed called Allah Islam Quran. Make of that what you will. I suppose it's possible that Israel's conflict spills over into Lebanon in a major way, which directly brings in Iran, and the US joins the fray in response. But it hasn't happened yet, and I don't think it's likely that it ever will. Jimmy just named 5 conflicts where that didn't happen, and I remember certain people saying the same exact thing at the height of those wars. Jimmy wasn't the only one insisting that the military-industrial complex wanted a war with Iran, though. His old pal and boss, Cenk speculated in a very similar way.
The largest factor is the money, Lebowski. So defense contractors want a war with Iran because they're not a nuclear country, and we know it because we were in a peace deal with them and took all the uranium out of their country. And we have intelligence showing that they have not developed nuclear capabilities. So if you start a war with Russia or China, it might cause World War III and end us all. And defense contractors are like, I want to make money, but my family lives in LA or New York or DC. I don't want them to die. So let's not go pick on Russia or China. We could do proxy wars and stuff, still make a lot of cash through Ukraine. But Iran, that's a perfect target. 4 times as large as Iraq, they make 4 times as much profit. And it'll spread to Lebanon and Syria and Israel and Palestine. And oh my God, millions of people will die. We'll make so much money. So they send all their lobbyists all over cable news, and cable news never tells you that the actual hidden agenda here is to make billions and maybe trillions of dollars for defense contractors, and by the way, also oil companies, because instability in the Middle East causes oil prices to spike. And it's an absolute epic disaster for the rest of us. Our kids are gonna go die there, let alone the hundreds of thousands of civilians on all sides that are gonna die there. Oil prices are gonna spike, gas prices, inflation. Everything is going to be a nightmare, but cable news will not tell you that the people causing that nightmare are their beloved, honored guests that they have brought on, and not told you that they're secretly trying to start a war so they can get richer because they work for defense contractors.
So, to sum up that long, idiotic rant, defense contractors, who of course produce weapons of war, want to maximize profit at any cost. Therefore, they encourage war through propaganda by dispatching people to the media to tell the American public that war is necessary, hence manufacturing consent for more conflict, and therefore creating increased demand for weapon sales, which will make them more money. This is a pretty common sentiment online. The funny thing is, this is something I've personally been accused of doing. As many of you know, I used to work for a defense contractor. And given my relatively hawkish views, I've gotten lots of "you're a shill for the military-industrial complex" comments over the years. In my video, The Young Turks Don't Get Deterrence, I talked about my old job and I got the following comment.
You work for a company who profits from selling weapons to the government. And the more hawkish the government is, the more deals your company makes, thus having a direct self-interest called the profit motive. This is not that hard to understand. Why do you get offended over the fact that people take your claims with a grain of salt? Why are you so surprised? It's kind of like talking to an employee working for a computer security company promoting the Y2K hysteria in 1999. And the company just happens to be selling a product called Fix the Y2K Bug. If you don't see anything wrong with that, then there is something wrong with you. And making a video where you simply admit, yes, I have a bias, so what, is not a solution.
By the way, if you want videos that are actually informative on Iran, check out my buddy Kirk Wilcox's channel. He has several of them. Turns out it's more complicated than military-industrial complex and oil companies bad. Links are in the comments section and description box below. First of all, the only reason anyone ever knew that that was my job is because I said so. If I really wanted to push a narrative in a self-interested way, I probably wouldn't have disclosed that. Second of all, I was neither offended nor surprised by any of these comments. I literally say in that video that I could have said that I worked for a chemicals company, or an aerospace company, or used a number of other accurate descriptors from my former employer. I deliberately chose to say that I worked for a defense contractor to rile up idiots like this dude. And we'll revisit the reality of large multinational corporations later, as there are qualities of these businesses that myopic dopes like Cenk fail to appreciate. Third, let's unpack just what this guy is accusing me of. He thinks that I was making hawkish videos in hopes that I will influence the few thousand people who watch my videos, most of whom probably already agree with me on most things, and not all of whom can vote in American elections, in hopes that this will help move the public opinion needle in a pro-war direction, so that the government buys more weapons, which will ultimately put more money in my pockets, a mid-level employee at a company that gets a portion of its revenue from defense contracts. Now, in fairness to him, the defense industry in the US is really hurting, and they definitely need all the help they can get, including from my tiny YouTube channel, to sell more weapons.
Sell more weapons! Sell more weapons!
I'm being sarcastic, of course. This is absurdly convoluted, and as I've also repeatedly said on this channel, I don't think Americans vote on issues, and I don't think elections revolve around substantive topics. Was I just lying in those videos? Also in that video, I specifically said that I was leaving my job in a few months, and I have since. So I guess he thinks my plan was just to line my pockets on the way out by propagandizing to you gullible rubes in the audience. This is what it looks like when someone is either too lazy, too stupid, or too dishonest to make an actual argument against someone's position. Speaking of such people, let's get back to Cenk. In fairness to him, it's at least slightly more plausible that this sort of thing happens at a larger scale. The defense industry, like every other large industry in the United States, has industry reps who, among other things, conduct media and PR strategies. And these people go to media outlets and make their case. Their ties to the industry are not always disclosed, even though they should be. So there is a certain logic to Cenk's theory, and it also starts from a correct premise. Corporations, including defense contractors, want to make more money. After that is where Cenk's theory starts to fall apart. Defense contractors do sell weapons. And since you need more weapons in a war, defense contractors must want more war to increase sales and will therefore do their best to encourage it, right? While I wouldn't say that never happens, the correct answer is not necessarily. See, here's the thing that Cenk and so many other people forget. All the major defense contractors in the United States are pretty much all large corporations that have significant business interests in non-military parts of the economy. Raytheon is involved in commercial electronics. General Dynamics is involved in civilian aircraft, as is Boeing. Northrop Grumman is involved in space programs, both public and private. Lockheed Martin is involved in corporate information security, and so on. These other interests don't always point them in a pro-war direction. Do you remember the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, otherwise known as the Iran nuclear deal? The main thrust of the deal was ostensibly to put restrictions on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting sanctions that had been put on the country. In 2018, for better or worse, the Trump administration pulled the US out of the deal, reimposing sanctions from the US, making it very difficult for US-based companies to trade with Iran. So why did the US withdraw, according to Cenk? Well, he gave a few reasons, but the most important, of course, was that those pesky defense contractors were at it again.
So look, I know the military-industrial complex that funds all these politicians think, oh, that last war turned out disastrous for everyone else and 5,000 Americans died in Iraq. But 50,000 got their limbs blown off, got severely injured. But who cares? We made money. You think the Iraq war was a disaster for you? You're right. But was it a disaster for the people who made the war happen? No. No, the defense contractors made billions upon billions in profits. By the way, so did the oil companies, because wars in the Middle East create instability in the oil markets and oil prices go up. So the people who paid for that war got everything they ever bargained for. But they're making a wrong gamble in Iran.
Also, for what it's worth, Cenk said this action was pushing us towards World War III. The funny thing is, you know who lost out big time when the US pulled out of the Iran deal? Boeing, the third largest defense contractor in the United States. You see, when the sanctions were lifted on Iran in the first place, Boeing and Airbus got a contract with the Iranian government to build their civilian air fleet worth $39 billion. They lost these contracts when the US pulled out of the deal. As the Washington Post reported, Boeing and Airbus will lose contracts worth roughly $39 billion to replenish Iran's aging fleet of commercial planes as part of the Trump administration's reimposition of sanctions. The Boeing and Airbus licenses will be revoked. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin told a group of reporters Tuesday, the existing licenses will be revoked. Boeing lost over $17 billion in that deal. The company I used to work for was one of Boeing's major suppliers for their commercial aircraft. The facility I worked at alone lost tens of millions of dollars in sales because the US pulled out of the deal. It's funny that people like Cenk always seem to ignore that side of the ledger. The same is also true of the multinational corporations that own most of our mainstream media. Let's say that the news people are just put in place to manufacture consents for profit maximization for their parent company. Would this point them in a pro-war direction? Again, the answer is not necessarily. Some of these companies do have ties to the defense industry, and they also get money in the form of advertisements from defense contractors, as Cenk himself has pointed out. So using Cenk's logic, I suppose there is a path there, but once again, this is myopic. As multinational corporations, they too have their fingers in many pies. Take, for example, the newspaper I cited earlier, the Washington Post. Who owns the Washington Post? Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is of course the founder and top shareholder of Amazon. Do you think that Amazon would rather have a war with Iran or sell things to the Iranian people? I cannot say for sure, but I do know that in 2020, Amazon had to pay $135,000 for violating US sanctions against Iran. As Forbes reported, between November 2011 and October 2018, persons in Crimea, Iran, and Syria were allowed to place orders and conduct business on Amazon's websites, the Office of Foreign Assets Control reported. For what it's worth, Amazon says that these sales were unintentional and were breaches of their automated process to prevent such transactions. Maybe so. But if your logic is that corporations just want to make profit no matter what, why would one of the largest retailers in the world want sanctions on countries in the first place, when they could easily have the people there as customers? Also, if these same corporations use the media to manipulate voters into doing their bidding, why would they try and push public opinion in a direction for sanctions, or war for that matter? The thing is, politics, especially international politics, is complicated. It's difficult to keep track of all the nuances and different perspectives of a given conflict, especially when you don't live in the countries that are being discussed. That's not a problem when you have an explanation for everything, though. Just pull a Cenk and assume that everyone who disagrees with you is bought off. Just assume that your detractors are all on the take, shout military-industrial complex, and you can explain everything you want without actually knowing anything at all.